And welcome to Morten. I will let him pronounce the name of his talk himself, but it sounds interesting. Here you go, Morten.
I can't pronounce it. I hope you did it for me. All right. Yeah, my name is Morten, and I'm from a company called Tilbudsavis, which is one of the most popular apps in Denmark that basically aggregates all the PDF catalogs in Scandinavia and then indexes them and makes them browsable via an app. And I know we have a Gen 2 install party in about an hour, so I think this talk is probably a good contrast to that and maybe an atypical BornHack presentation because there's a lot of design in it, but this talk is more about how we can take a designer's work and put it into code. Because I think we can learn a lot from designers, and I also think they can learn a lot from engineers, because I think those two disciplines are too isolated today as it is. So this talk is about how we can make algorithms out of a designer's work. And let's just get to it. I'm not a designer, by the way. I'm not an engineer either, you could say. I'm just self-taught. I think I have a good sense of design, but I'm not a designer in any way. And I guess that's also a thing that maybe helps me a little bit because I'm not biased. I don't have too much experience within design, so I'm not kind of... I'm more neutral when it comes to design. I want to talk about how it is today when you go online, and then I want to talk about how it is in the physical world. And I want to start out just by showing our website. Basically, not just our website, but a lot of websites nowadays is structured like this. It's usually just a grid, which is responsive in the sense that there are certain breakpoints. So when you have a smaller screen, it uses another breakpoint, and on mobile, it uses another breakpoint. But it basically just overflows, and then it basically just adds more scroll. And they're all just the same thing. It's just the same cell, and you just input other data in it. So you have varying titles and prices and images, but they're all structured exactly the same way. There's no difference in how the layout is, except for the data itself. And you can just kind of scroll into infinity until you at some point become bored or tired of doing it, and then you leave the page. So there's no sense of ending either. Amazon is the same, although much better than we are, because they also have a lot of algorithms that can determine what kind of content to show. But this is just a screenshot I took on their website. It's just basically, as you saw before, one template to rule them all, and it's just repeated infinitely. They are, however, a bit better because they have divided all the content into these sections, for example, hot new releases or bestsellers, so they kind of communicate to me as a user and not just show a lot of books. They also have ratings, for example, that tells me something about what other people think about it. So they are like the next step of how you could do design and data display online. Then you have like a women's or a men's clothing store, where they, instead of focusing on text, they focus on images. But again, it's just images being repeated infinitely. And instead of the template having a title and a description and all that stuff, the template is just an image. And the image is usually just like this white background and then a model with the clothes they want to sell. It is more inspiring because you kind of see it in a context, but it's basically just the same thing over and over again as you scroll. Netflix is, you can probably see yourself in this situation where you like spend 30 minutes on Netflix trying to find the movie you want, and it's just scrolling and scrolling. It's vertical scrolling, it's horizontal scrolling until you find something you might like, or you just give up. Netflix is actually doing a lot of A/B tests with the actual image to figure out which cover image is the best, and figure out which cover image gives you the most clicks, like the click ratio. And that's kind of what they do to inspire you to click a movie. It might look new to you because it's another cover image than the original cover image. And then they're like Amazon, they're really, really good at kind of suggesting things based on what I saw before or what is trending. And actually what is trending is not trending overall, it's actually what's trending within the categories I like. But I think when you go online, this is kind of what you see. It's like the same cells, the same templates, repeated, vertically scroll, horizontal scroll, and they try to do better by making these subsections, but it's basically the same thing over and over again. Then when you go to the, and oh, by the way, just to summarize this, it's very, it's just kind of boring, I think, when you go online. You go to a web shop, there's like a breadcrumb at the bottom, and you're like page 1 out of page 3,000, and like next page. I think there's room for doing this in a better way. The offline world, however, is another beast altogether, because they do it in a completely different way. And I just want to show you an example of a catalog we have on our app to show you like the difference between the online and physical world. This is an example of a physical catalog you get in your mailbox in Denmark. And it's just very, very different from the online world. You have, for example, a lot of different colors. You have varying grids. Every page is unique. You have bigger sizes of the things they want to show you. It's not just about a text or showing it as the first thing in the array. It's also about giving it more size to make it more important and prominent. And this is a human being who did this manually. So this page is very time consuming and very expensive to produce compared to Netflix, which where they have to make an algorithm, of course. They have to figure out what content to show and make a template, of course. But once that template is done, you can just show it to millions of people without having to have any people involved in the process. Whereas in the physical world, you have to make new pages manually over and over again. So this is years of experience within design, designers trying to find the best way to communicate content to people. And somehow when we tried to take that to the physical world, we kind of forgot all those things because we wanted a way to automate design on the web, for example. So we made a simple version instead. And I think you can actually unify those two things without having to make too many compromises. Another example of a page, it's not just about the content either. There's like titles that inspire you. You can do other things over here. You can see recipes that relate to that product, for example. It's not just the product itself, it's also about showing how the product can be used and putting it into a setting. Try to make some emotions and show a lot of different images and green price background color and all those things to make a setting. Try to visualize to the user how it will be when they buy the product. Whereas on Netflix, it's very uninspiring. The only thing that inspires you is like the section title and then the cover image. And that's why I think a lot of times it can be tricky to find a movie on Netflix, because it doesn't really inspire you. Trailers help a lot, but you have to kind of invest time in seeing a trailer. And another example. So, yeah, the reason why I think is that it's super difficult to automate what you just saw before. It is not impossible, as I'm going to show you, but it's very difficult to actually automate this because when you just look at it, it doesn't really look like there are any rules. It just looks like it's a person kind of doing it as they go along, and not. It can seem like there aren't any rules to that page, but there are actually a lot of different rules to it. And that's what we've been spending a lot of time on. So we had to try to do that because we wanted to unify those two things and hopefully make a world where you don't have to make physical catalogs, but you can just view the catalogs online, but without having to go compromise the design and the communication in the catalog. So this is actually what we ended up with. I'm just going to click on it. And this is actually live in production today. This is Superbrusen. And this is actually an auto-generated page where the only images on this page is actually just the actual product images. All the stuff around here is all automatically generated by a computer by distilling the designer's work into algorithms. And as you scroll, you get a different experience. And every page is unique. And every page is kind of where they try to put things into a setting. And it's fully responsive, which is actually quite interesting, because if a designer had to do that, they wouldn't just, maybe it's difficult to see, I don't think I can scale it up. But basically, if a designer had to make all those different permutations in hand, it would be impossible and they would never be able to complete the catalog in time. But because we've automated the process, you can actually make an experience for every single device and screen that comes in, even person in the future. And that's kind of the first goal we had, to actually automate this so that in the future we can actually make a personal experience to you. And the same on an iPhone. It's just different as you go along. It's probably difficult to see. And on the desktop too. And here's another page, as you saw before, made in the physical world, but this is actually completely digital, made by a computer on demand. Like when I open the catalog and make a request, we generate a version for you, and then we render it immediately. And another one. So they're all very different and very inspiring altogether. And the way we did this is months and months of work, but the first thing we had to solve was we needed a way to have a computer generate what a client had to render. Because the first step was to actually have a computer that can generate this without any people involved, and then just send those instructions to a client and then have the client render it. And we could just make it in HTML if we were a web page, but we wanted to make something that works across platforms in our app, on another app, and on our website and on another website. So we first had to figure out how do we make a format for defining layout, and a format that is so stupid that the client doesn't have any logic. It just does exactly what the server tells it. Because as you saw, the layouts are very different from week to week. There's no specific template we can reuse. Everything is different. So if we had to put that logic on the client, we would have to update our app like 10 times a day. And then before we know it, we have like 200 different app versions running because people haven't upgraded to the latest version. So we needed a way to have a format where the server was in control. And we were heavily inspired by Android and Android's XML layout for how you define views, where it's this very explicit tree-based structure, as you can see here. So everything is just an object, and every object has an array of views, subviews. And every view has like some base properties, like a width and height and all those things. And we have like a text view and an image view and different types of views. But there aren't any business logic or any company-specific views or elements in this format. It's completely decoupled from us, and it's just a very crude layout format so that the server can generate this. And yeah, it's very explicit. There's no inheritance or anything like that. It just does exactly what the server tells it. And it's open source, by the way, because it's not something that we just want to be able to do. We want to allow other companies to generate this format as well and have it rendered. Like, it would be amazing if Netflix used this layout format to show videos in a more inspiring way, for example. So this is not something we keep to ourselves. So that was the first step, having something a machine could generate and clients could render. because it is server-driven UI, particularly because every cell is different week to week, and nothing is the same. There's nothing that's static in this output. And we started out by making a grid builder. And usually when it comes to grids, you start out by defining a grid, and then you put content in it. You usually say, on desktop I want 4 columns, and on tablet I want 3 columns, and on mobile I want 2 or 1 columns. And then you just put the content in and just allow the browser to, via media queries, define how many columns to show. We did it the other way around, where we start out by the content and say, okay, we have, let's say in Amazon's case, we have 5 books we want to present to the user. And then based on those books and the importance of each book, we try to generate the best grid for those books. So it's the completely other way around, where the layout doesn't define, or kind of the initial design doesn't define the final output. It's the content that defines the final output. And we basically, the funny thing here is that the server gets a width that the client understands, and then based on that width, it generates a grid, and then it gives it the format back I showed you with specific widths and heights, and then the client just renders it. So there's no responsiveness in the sense that you can take your browser and then re-render your window. It's not responsiveness like that, but when you open the catalog and request the catalog, we make a responsive version for you in that particular time. And then if you change, for example, the orientation on your iPad, we can just make another request and then render that. But everything is calculated on the server because we need to know the exact dimensions of everything in order to actually calculate that final output you saw. So on mobile, it can look like this. For example, in this case, the most important thing is the first offer here. So that's the biggest one. And then we have another group of offers, those 2 in the middle, and then we put those together, and then the final and least important offer is at the bottom. And the same page on tablet looks like this. We just take the most important product at the top, and then the other ones at the bottom. And then on the desktop, we actually use a lot of different design rules. For example, the rule of third. So we divide the page into 3 thirds. And that's just a general rule. If you do that, things look natural and harmonic. So the primary one gets 2 thirds, and then the other ones gets 1/3, and the height of this grid is calculated using the golden ratio as a function of the width. So you end up with a grid that looks very natural and actually uses what a designer would do in the physical world. And it's not completely on purpose, but there's also something about visual direction. You don't want your eyes to stop at the first product. You want your eyes to move to the next set of offers. So you have this image here and this image here, so you actually want your eyes to travel like that and then up over here. So the positioning of things inside the offer is also very important in terms of not stopping at one particular offer, but actually traveling towards the next set of offers. And that's something they do a lot when it comes to the physical world. You want your eyes to travel in the right direction. And for Netflix, for example, when you have a section, for example, called trending, usually the first movie in that list is what they want you to click on. But the only thing that makes it important is just the ordering. But in the physical world, they also give it more prominence in size. So the price is bigger, the images are bigger, and the title is bigger. So that's also a technique you can use to make something look more interesting. Not just show it as the first thing, but also make it bigger. And also perhaps change the colors so that they don't all look the same. We don't do this on this particular page, though. Another thing on the web, in this case, is if you go to, for example, Nemlig, which is an amazing e-commerce site, and they do a great job, but there are certain places where they could do better, I would say. And in this case, I searched for K-salat, and they basically show these 4 offers, or at least these 3 offers, and they're the exact same product except for one minor thing. The price is the same, and the images look very similar. You wouldn't do this in the physical world because you don't want to repeat yourself too much with images. They look too similar. So in the physical world, you would do something like this. You would group them into one offer, and then you would just say that it's K-salat, and then the price, and then you would show the different versions of that product in kind of connected to each other to avoid taking up too much space on the page, because you have to show, in this case, 5 different product images on the page. It would just kind of mess up the entire page and distract you from the other offers. So we spend a great deal of time, actually Jonas sitting right there, spent a great deal of time on solving that particular issue. And it's basically about having a box, which is here or here, and then you have a set of images that you kind of want to fit into that box. And one approach is to just kind of brute force your way through it with like a greedy pack thing, and then you just hope it looks good. But a designer wouldn't do that. A designer would look at the actual content, and then based on that content, he or she would figure out how to actually position those images in this particular box. And this is one technique we've developed to actually make this design look more human. That's kind of the end goal we had here, is when you look at a page that we generate automatically, it should look like a human being did that for you, like behind the scenes as you requested it. So what we do is, or what Jonas do in this case, is we have kind of like 4 different strategies to how we pack an image or a set of images into a box. And the first thing we do is look at the amount of images. If there's just a single image, we just put it in the middle and then that's it. However, it becomes more interesting when we look at images that look similar. So if you have, in this case, those 5 products that are the same aspect ratio and width and height, we kind of pack them into these predefined patterns that designers use. And that's just a range of different patterns that designers deploy to position things in a nice way. So we're not using big data or anything like that, or using machine learning or anything like that. It's just plain old simple heuristics, looking at what other people do and then try to put that into an algorithm. And then if you have a set of images where the images have different aspect ratios, we try to group the images into those aspect ratios, and then we deploy the pattern pack on those groups that we actually ended up making. And then finally, if we can't do any of those things, we just kind of make a greedy solution to the problem, which usually doesn't look great. So that's a very... We rarely use it, but we have to have a fallback. And we actually made this so that it both works in a node context, but it also works in a browser context. And we actually open sourced it on GitHub. We call it pack-animal, pack-animal. And that's kind of a library or module you can use if you have a website and you want to show a set of images and you kind of want to group them in a way where they look natural and like human positioned. You could use this tool. Another technique designers use is that they use environment images. They don't just show the product, they actually show the product in a context. And this one was very tricky to solve because we had to figure out how to position things inside an image without covering up the actual images. So if you take a look at this is actually an auto-generated version. But a human being would very easily be able to just figure out that they can place this comment up here and not covering these images. That's so easy for a human being to do. But if a computer has to do this in an automatic way, it's not as easy. And this one as well, figuring out how to position it so that it relates to the products inside the image. This is just one big image, but the products are inside this image. So how do you actually position elements inside that image without covering up the actual images? And here we used computer vision. It might be tricky to see, but we're basically using computer vision to detect the contours inside the image. So we basically use OpenCV and we grayscale the image and do a lot of blurring and stuff like that, and then we detect the contours inside the image, and we end up with something like this. Not perfect because you have like that inset there, but it's good enough for us to know where the contours inside the image is, so that we know how to position things. And this is another example. It's very dark over there, but we want to be able to position things on this side without covering up the actual wine and Christmas tree in this case. Finally, because we are at a point now where we can automate design, we can actually take design to the next level, because the physical world has always been weighed down by the fact that you have to do it in hand. So you kind of have to make this one size fits all. Everyone gets the same experience. You can't make things in a more dynamic way. You can't make something specific to me. You can't make something that is dependent upon time of day or maybe the weather, because if a person has to do it on the fly, it would just be impossible. But because we are at a point now where we can actually do this automatically, this data-driven approach to design, we can start to look at other data points and then automatically use those points to improve the experience. And one thing we've done is just kind of a simple thing, but just looking at the weather. So we've integrated with a weather API called Dark Sky, and based on the IP address, we can figure out in what region you are, and then look up the weather for today and tomorrow. And then for certain products, we can actually change the layout or communication based on how the weather will be, for example, tomorrow. And we've actually already accomplished that. It might be tricky to see, but I actually saw this by accident, because you can't just kind of reproduce it. It only shows in certain cases, where I was just opening Factor's digital catalog here, which is auto-generated now. And that was during the time where the weather was almost too good. And then in the system, we made an algorithm that says if the weather tomorrow is good, and good is defined by a lot of different heuristics, because what is good weather? So our algorithm says that if it's clear skies and above an apparent temperature of 25 degrees Celsius, and if it's not too windy, and if the precipitation, I think it's called that, chance is below 10%, then we say it's good weather. And for offers on ice cream, we then say that the meteorologist expects sun tomorrow. Expects, that's a very important word, because we don't really know, and they don't know either. So we kind of have to write ourselves out of that one. But it's just an example of something you can do automatically. And if you just go back to, for example, this image here, we can actually just auto-generate a text saying it's going to be rosé weather tomorrow, and the algorithm and the service can figure out how to place that comment so that it doesn't cover these images. And no people have to be involved in that process. You just make an algorithm saying, if this, then that, basically. And you can look at all sorts of different things. We have like a context API. The context API says something about the weather now and tomorrow, also the time of day. So if you open the catalog in the morning, you could say something else to the user automatically. If you open it on a Friday afternoon and it's just about to be weekend, you can say something about that, or you can show products automatically that is something that might be of interest in the weekend. And going further than that, not just looking at context, already now we have maybe 20,000 different permutations of the catalog I showed here. Like 20,000 different versions of this catalog just by looking at the context alone, and it's all auto-generated by a computer compared to the physical world where there's only one version of this catalog. And going further, we want to be even smarter about weather. We want to not just show this small little comment saying that it's going to be, or we expect nice weather tomorrow, but also make an offer more prominent or show the offer at the top instead. Make something that is really context aware and not necessarily this one size fits all at the top. And then try to experiment with personalization without it being personalization. We don't want to track you or develop a profile on you specifically, but if we can make some sort of profile on the client, and then when you request the catalog, we can receive a profile saying this person likes ice cream, or this person likes tech, for example, and then use that data to make the experience even better. So that's what we're experimenting with, like making the data collection on the client and making a profile on the client without ever leaving the device, and just sending up a profile to the server and then use that data. And then we really want to make more Netflixy propositions. You saw this perhaps, or you like this, so we're showing you this. Kind of explain to the user why they're seeing those movies or those series on the screen. That could be really cool. And then a simple thing, but something that's possible because it's automatic, and that would be to, as soon as they publish a catalog, after 2 hours, you already have an idea about what people like and don't like in that catalog. And then you can use that data to change the sort order of a catalog automatically and make it even smarter, or basically what you thought would work in the morning might be something completely different in the afternoon based on how people respond to the catalog. And basically just run a lot of different tests on what works. If we increase the title by this, what happens then? Or if we change the sort order to this, what happens then? Just like Netflix does it with changing the cover images of a movie and then seeing how people react to that. So that's an example of what we've been doing to try to take the best from the world of design and then putting it into code, so that once print and at some point is not existing anymore, we can still take all the good stuff but move it to an online world. Thanks.
Do we have any questions? Vi snakker dansk. No, we speak English, sorry.
So how is it any better to store a profile that was generated on the client than it is to store a profile that is generated on the server, or even not store but just process a profile?
Well, in order to build a profile on the server, you would need to have all the data points for that particular user in time, and we basically want to avoid that. Ideally, we want to build something that doesn't require consent. And in order to build something that doesn't require consent, you have to build something that's private by design. We want to improve the experience of a catalog and the experience for you without having to opt into things and without having to give up your privacy. Because I think there's a tendency, I think we talked about that earlier today, in the advertising space, where it's about tracking you. And we kind of want to move away from that and try to do as much on the client, actually all of it on the client.
So that sounds good, but in that case, it seems like the algorithm needs to run on the client as well, right? For me, it seems equally problematic to have my profile somewhere else, right? Than just having all of the data that can be transformed into a profile somewhere else. Like I'd like to have my profile stay with me, please.
Yeah, exactly.
And so yeah, move the computation out to the end user, perhaps.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what we want to do. So all the rules, the algorithms, the design algorithms is on the server. But all the data, the private data, or the data points about you, your profile, is only on the client. And then when you request a catalog in this case, you say, this is me, but you're not saying me as me in person, but I like this and I like this, which is a profile you've computed on the client alone. So you don't get the raw data, you just get the aggregated profile.
That's not any different.
I think we'll move on now. You can take it afterwards.
Yeah, let's do that.
Next question.
I'm wondering if you've investigated or considered a use case of neutral content. So if I have a set of visual items I want to have displayed, but I have no weighting among the items and no one else is making decisions on what should be displayed. Have you looked into that?
Kind of figuring out the order of things and which one is most important?
Well, yeah, say I have a local set of objects and I want an aesthetic layout, but I don't really want to I don't want to manually place items.
Yeah, so we've built a service basically, excuse me, that is not coupled to us or catalogs or anything like that. It's basically just a service where you can give your data, your models, whatever it is, and then we basically build some templates for those. So you would have to build some templates and some algorithms to begin with, unless you can tap into what we've already built, and then based on those things we can generate the design. So for offers and products that we've invested in as the first thing, we would be able to do it immediately. If you wanted to show perhaps books, we would have to build the algorithms for that first in order to do that. So there's a lot of initial work in doing this, and that's maybe also why a lot of companies avoid going into this path, because it's very work consuming initially to figure out how things should work. But once you do it, I think the reward is worth it. But it's, any kind of data should be possible to use here.
Any more questions? Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you very much.